Hi, once again, I'm glad to be with you on my weekly Ask Chuck webcast. Thank you very much for participating, and those of you who sent in questions on email, Twitter, or Facebook, thank you very much for sending your questions. In just a moment, I'm going to be taking two of those questions to answer via my webcast. For those of you who don't get your questions answered this way, please expect an answer through the mail. So I'll immediately go to the questions, and I start with Tom from Hiawatha. He asks a question but also makes a statement. Would you please apply the same passion and energy into allowing our country to explore and drill for oil and natural gas as you do in trying to supplement our energy needs with ethanol? You and your colleagues have sat back and allowed the liberals to handcuff our own domestic abilities to find more oil and natural gas right here in America. Time to fight that fight. Thank you. Well, to Tom at Hiawatha, I would direct you to my website, grassley.senate.gov, and last Wednesday you will find a speech that I gave on the Senate floor that basically not only defends ethanol and speaks about ethanol, but also speaks about the need for this country to have four parts of a national energy program. One is to drill here and drill now. And in support of my saying that, I can tell you over a long period of time, so many times, as just one example of voting to drill here and drill now, I've always been a supporter of drilling in Alaska because there's 13 billion barrels of oil up there for our use if we could just tap it. Number two, you have to have all sorts of alternative energy. And we may talk about ethanol because that's what the amendment up is about. But I could talk about all biofuels, wind, solar, geothermal, hydro, you name it. And number three, we have to conserve. And number four, we have to have use of nuclear energy. And by the way, all of these four have some sort of government support. Big oil going back for almost 100 years, ethanol for 30 years, conservation for a long period of time, and nuclear going back at least 50 or 60 years that nuclear has had some support from the government. So my defense of ethanol is only because the amendment's up now, but I agree 100% with you that we ought to be making greater uses of our own domestic supply of petroleum, drill here and drill now, instead of sending $730 billion or $730 million every day overseas to, let's say, the oil sheiks, where they use the money to train people to kill people like you and me. Bottom line of it is we need a comprehensive energy program. I think I've outlined a comprehensive energy program. And when it comes to talking about ethanol as opposed to everything else on energy, that's because that's what the amendment before the United States Senate is all about. I would invite you to think about this when you wonder about whether or not we ought to be talking about ethanol. 10% of the energy used in transportation is renewable fuels. Should we be importing 10% more of our oil, or even drilling here 10% more oil, or wouldn't it be better to use a domestically produced renewable fuel here that can be made in the United States, along with all the petroleum that we can use that we produce as well? Thank you very much, Tom, and I'll go on then to the next. Is Bob from Bentendorf tweets, interest on the debt will be $270 billion in 2011. Why don't budget talks start at 10%, which would be $300 billion? Well, if you were talking about across the board of the entire budget, including entitlements, I would agree with you. But right now we're talking about 15% of the budget that includes what we call discretionary domestic. and it would be impossible to get that $300 billion out of that 15%, but it wouldn't be impossible to get the $300 billion out of the 45% and the 20% we spend on defense, and that's almost everything except interest on the national debt. So I agree with you, but it's just a case of what's up right now, and that's why we're targeting the $100 billion that was promised in the last election, which on a proportional basis, because we're already 5 months into the new fiscal year, happens to turn out to be $61 billion between now and the end of the year. But we do have to get to the entitlements, because that's where the major part of government spending is coming from. Not only do we have to get there to make sure that budgets are handled in a more wise way and fiscally conservative way, but for the benefit of senior citizens depending upon Social Security and Medicare, we got to make sure that those are sound programs, and they aren't sound programs today. If you're interested in what I would like to see happen, a philosophical basis for the $61 billion as opposed to the $6 billion that the Democrats in the Senate would like to cut, we have a situation where over the last 2 years we've increased government spending by 22%, and that's on top of the $814 billion stimulus package that didn't keep unemployment under 8%, so it shouldn't have been passed because it didn't work. On my side of the aisle, we think that we cannot incorporate that 22% into budgeting from here till eternity. We got to preempt that. So our goal is to go back to the 2008 level of expenditures and freeze for 10 years. The president wants to incorporate that 22% and then freeze for 5 years after it. The difference between this and this is roughly $1 6/10 trillion over the next 10 years of this year's budget window. So thank you very much, both of you, for your questions. The rest of the week, we're going to be spending on two things. The repeal of the 1099 requirement for people to report to the IRS when they buy anything from people over $600. That's a tremendous administrative burden for small business. We want to eliminate that. That was unconsciously put in the health care reform bill, which I voted against. And we got to get that taken out of there so we don't have that burden on small business. And then we'll be passing, between now and the midnight Friday, the bill dealing with funding of government for the rest of this year so that we don't have a government shutdown. I ask you to tweet, Facebook, and email. Thank you very much.